to brass tacks. We have a really special guest today. I first came to know this author after he published his first book, a memoir titled "When Skateboards Will Be Free," which I actually have right here. I have a signed copy. It was a very personal story about a childhood spent in the Socialist Workers' Party. And I was able to interview Said for that book. He was very generous to do a long form style interview about his process, which I subjected him to do by email, I remember. And ever since then, I have been a super fan of his, and I'm so lucky to call him a friend. I have enjoyed his stories when they appear in The New Yorker, where Said is a frequent contributor. Then I read them again and I study these stories. I teach his stories. I talk about them with friends. They're just great. I'm a huge fan, which brings me to his most recent story collection, American Estrangement. And I'm going to share my screen just to show you that. American Estrangement. And this collection introduces us to a set of unforgettable characters. I spent the week, this past week, reading these stories. They're about people at times down on their luck, stuck in odd jobs like construction, or as a receptionist at an art gallery that receives no customers. And some of the stories also give us a glimpse of a terrifying dystopian America, where the country is sectioned off by state borders, where public hangings happen at rural fairgrounds in the story Fairground. This collection's part Raymond Carver and part Margaret Atwood, but it's wholly in the style of our author today, Said Sayrafiezadeh. His first book, as I said, was When Skateboards Will Be Free, and it was selected as one of the 10 best books of the year by Dwight Garner of the New York Times. And his story collection, his second book, Brief Encounters with the Enemy, was a finalist for the Penn Robert Bingham Fiction Prize. His writing has appeared in the New Yorker, the Paris Review, the Best American Short Stories, Granta, McSweeney's, the New York Times, and New American Stories, among other publications. I really like New American Stories. That was a very cool recent compilation of New American Stories. He's the recipient of a Whiting Writers Award for nonfiction and a Cullman Center for Scholars and Writers Fiction Fellowship from the New York Public Library. Said leads the creative nonfiction track in Hunter College's MFA program. He also teaches creative writing at Columbia University and New York University, where he received an outstanding teaching award. Everybody, please welcome Said Sayrafiezadeh.
Thank you. Thunderous applause. Thank you.
Thunderous. I'm gonna pin you, and I'm gonna pin me. And if you guys want to, I think the best way to watch us is through speaker view, where we'll both be pinned rather than gallery. That's the best experience, I'll say. Said, welcome. Thanks for coming, man.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here in my apartment, Zooming with you. Sorry we can't be in person, but maybe next time.
Yes.
But thanks for the introduction too, Alex. That was really nice. It's really nice. And we go back a lot. We go back to when you were a student at Hunter. That's when we first met. You were a fiction student.
Yeah. Yeah, I was a fiction student at Hunter. I was doing my MFA. Do you remember where we first met? Do you?
Some party with free wine somewhere?
Okay,
yes.
Yeah. We did meet at a party, but I knew who you were because I used to write at Housing Works, the bookstore in Manhattan, and I'd see you writing there too every day. And there were a bunch of writers there who were working on books who would come every day. I remember. And then I got,
yes.
but I wasn't just going to go up to you and introduce myself. We had an opportunity to meet much later. So wait, where do you write? Where do you work now? I know you used to work in cafes, but where do you write now? Do you have
I'm 4 feet away on my couch. That's where I sit and write. Yep.
Okay.
I stay home. It's working for me. It's much better. I don't have distractions. So I get to just drink all the coffee I want for free. Hey, so by the way, are folks here? So just to take the temperature of the Zoom room, I mean, are we are writers, students, or Jerseyites, or not necessarily any of those? We're coming in from.
Yeah, how many? We have a lot of graduate student writers. We have some undergrads. Yeah, and then we have some general audience, some readers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some of these folks here are your students?
Some of them are my students. Raise your hand. You're my student. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm taking attendance. And we have a lot of faculty in the room. So we have a lot of school. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I'm going to start this off. I wanted to, there's a lot about you that I don't know. So we're going to have a discussion at first, then Said's going to read, and then we're going to open it up to a Q&A for everybody. I wanted to talk about how you got started as a writer. And I think I know that you started in the theater. Is that correct? And can you talk a little bit about that and like how you transitioned over into, writing literature?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the things, listen, everybody's got their own journey for all the students there. And it's not always linear. As Alex said, my original dream was to be an actor. And listen, but also a writer. I kind of wanted to do both. I moved to New York specifically to pursue acting. I was in my early 20s. And I just was having no luck. I was having no success. Part of the issue was, Alex, part of the issue was my name, my ethnicity. I was only being brought in for auditions, and I'm not exaggerating. This isn't me trying to be funny, but like I was being brought in for like taxi cab driver, deli owner, like those kinds of roles. I got the sense that, first of all, so my options were limited. If I even got cast as that, is that really like the kind of art that I want to be doing? And is that really going to be like, what would be the pinnacle of my acting career, to be on a soap opera back when there were I don't know, it just felt like I could sort of see like a hollow, my life unfolding before me, that even if I was to achieve success was going to somehow be hollow. Okay, so then all of that said, I still was interested in writing, and I was fine, and I also wanted to be a playwright. Listen, basically, I tried every single thing. I tried everything. And I was like,
you wrote plays, and you've had a bunch produced.
Yes. I've written play. And then, okay, now let's get to the fun part. Then I actually started writing personal essays. And by the way, not that anybody's asking me for advice today, but one thing that happened for me very early on when I started writing prose was I submitted it. And I submitted it to a literary website that might not be the most glamorous. I mean, I think we all want to be in the New Yorker, but I got published on this lit website, and it brought me to the attention of, and I'm condensing, like, basically I'm eliding all of the many months that nothing happens. But after some time, it brought me to the attention of an editor at Granta Magazine, actually. And, one of the things that I had never thought about doing really was to write about, Alex mentioned my first book, my memoir, which When Skateboards Will Be Free. I never really thought about writing about my life. I didn't think it was all that interesting. As Alex mentioned, I grew up in a very fringe left-wing organization called the Socialist Workers' Party. My experience of my upbringing was literally pretty much boredom, that I would be, in these political meetings, my mom would drag me to. I was a child that didn't really understand what was being said. It didn't seem at all, it certainly wasn't interesting to me. I didn't think it would be interesting to anyone else. But I did have an editor who suggested that I write a long piece about my family, specifically for Granta. And by the way, Alex, have I gone off the rails?
No. This is great. And
Okay,
I have a few
good.
follow-ups after
Okay,
this.
good. So long here, I'm going to make a very long story, try to get it a little bit less long. I wrote about my family. I wrote about my dad, who I did not grow up with. He's Iranian. I wrote about the Socialist Workers' Party, the impact it had on my life. And he published it. And from that, this is my trajectory. From that, I was able to get an agent, and I was able to sell the memoir on a proposal. I didn't have to write the whole thing. I'm assuming most folks here are fiction, yes, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. I mean, there are
Okay.
a lot of fiction, but there are people here writing memoirs also.
Okay, so one of the benefits, and I mean, Alex, push back if you think I'm off base, but I think one of the things about nonfiction is you don't have to necessarily write the whole book in order to sell it to a publisher.
Yeah.
It doesn't generally work that way with a novel. A novel, publishers want to see the whole thing before they decide whether or not they want it. So, okay, so I was able to sell it on a proposal, and that became my first book.
That's amazing.
We got failed actor, moderately successful playwright, and then we get to me being a prose writer.
That's so interesting. This is
and let me just add one thing. Let me add one more thing. Sorry to interrupt, because now I'm blabbing. For me, writing prose is the most, for lack of a better word, most expressive I can be. It's like in plays, it's really tough for me in plays because it's only dialogue, it's only stage directions. You don't have a playwright, you don't have a theater, there's no grad playwriting, right, Alex? No.
Yeah.
So I have found plays to be very difficult and also limiting in that regard. But with prose, it's now I can really say what it is I want to talk about.
Your answer is so interesting, and there's so many things I want to follow up on. Well, first of all, was that first website where you published that personal essay, was that Mr. Beller's Neighborhood?
That would be it.
I remember that website. That was a great website where it had a map of stories in New York City, and you could just like scroll over the boroughs and pick a story wherever that was. That's amazing. And so from that website, which wasn't super well known, I think people in New York City liked it and read it, and Thomas Beller was the editor and the founder of that website. So through that, an editor at Granta in London, England,
that's exactly right,
contacted you because of this sort of small, I'm not saying personal essay on this small website across the pond. That's amazing.
Joe, and the sort of awe that you're talking about it in is exactly what I felt too. I was like, wait a minute, this is how this works. Somebody somewhere else. So I mean, that's also one of the great things about the web, is that it has such a broad reach, which is another part of me being snobbish, but maybe this is also because I'm from another generation. Only print for me, only print, only the finest, right? No. Websites are great. The internet is great. I don't think this is coming as news to anyone, but
that's still the way, like we think about it. We think like, oh, this is going to be on the New Yorker website.
Right.
That's not.
That's right.
But in actuality, you might have even more readers.
Yes.
Beyond the subscribers, or the Paris Review website. Beyond the thing. Well, that's so cool because I think we have a lot of people in the room who are submitting their first stories, their first personal essays. Actually, we have a
Right.
couple that are publishing them.
Oh, wow. Excellent.
Allie Long's one of our students that published a new story.
Right.
And you never know what's going to happen. And I always believe that whatever you put out there, it always leads to something, whether that's like a talk somewhere or a conversation that you run into somebody who read it. For me, it always leads to something more,
But Alex, is that overstating it slightly? Do you think everything leads to
Perhaps.
something?
Yeah,
Okay.
perhaps. No. Like, I'll give you an example. Like when I published my first book, I was asked by the New York Times to write an op-ed, right? And I said yes. And I was paralyzed, like, because I was like, this needs to sound smart.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not that smart. And I just had kind of imposter syndrome. I wrote something and I submitted it to them and they rejected it. And I was devastated, but I knew I bit off more than I could chew. I promised something that I was just not a journalist. I couldn't get that together. But then that led to something else. Like then I sent it to NPR and they published it. And then I got to read it on the radio. It was a failure and it just turned into something.
And by the way, did you after it was turned down by the Times, did you rewrite it, or was that just exactly what went to NPR?
No, an editor at NPR asked me, do you have anything that would be, good? And then I just sent what I had submitted and they were like, oh, great. Let's just, I'd love to do this. Can you just punch up the humor a little bit and take out all this boring stuff where I was trying to sound smart? And then I was able to it helped me, kind of write more like myself. And
Alex, I got a follow up for you. So,
yeah.
By the way, so when the Times turned it down, did they give you any reason for turning it down, or any notes, or?
I don't remember actually. I don't think it was like a resubmit thing. I just think this one doesn't work. And then I didn't push. I was like, yeah, I know it sucks.
Because
like,
to your point, also when you say, I guess the way you phrased it was like everything leads to something else.
Yeah.
And definitely that's a success story. I would say even when you get rejected, and I feel like this is going to sound like me being a Pollyanna, but it's like, I think it's important to get rejected, as painful as it is. And the reason why I was asking if the Times said anything was because sometimes when you get rejected, they can be gracious enough, not necessarily just the Times, but an editor can say, like, and maybe it's just a sentence, like, here's what wasn't working. And that's kind of a gift. And that's like your own version of a grad class right there. The first story I ever submitted to the New Yorker, I remember they turned it down and they said, basically nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, oh, so does that mean in a short story, something has to happen? Never really, I hadn't conceived. I was like, okay, so now the next one I write, I'll write with that idea in mind, that something must happen. And by the way, Alex, so maybe also part of the thing about the Times and NPR is just also like different style. I'm wondering, like, something could be good, but just not right for a specific publication.
Yeah. I think it was like that, but I also think like I didn't quite get op-eds yet. I was pretty young, like 29. I didn't quite get op-ed writing, and I put too much pressure on myself, but also I think it was actually wrong. And yeah, there were different styles. Like it was more of an NPR kind of style, and they wanted more of a humor piece, and they actually brought out what it could be. Like they and I do believe, I think that the Times did tell me something. Like they did give me a note, and of course, like, please, resubmit something, or no, not resubmit, but please, anything else, please pitch us, kind of thing. Right. So it wasn't a closed door. It was still.
Did you take up on that, by the way?
I did. But that led to something else. And then my book actually came out, and then it, I kind of got away from doing so much of those. But yeah, well, all right, enough about me. I want to transition into so you wrote that, you wrote these personal essays that led to your first book, and then you started writing short stories. How did that transition happen, and did you always want to write fiction? I'm curious. I'm not sure if we've talked about
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. And so, but after the memoir came out, I didn't know what the hell I was going to do next.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if this was just going to be just like, am I just going to do I just write memoirs now? Like, I felt like I told the story I needed to tell. So what do I do now? Do I write a memoir about writing the memoir? Like, is it going to be that? Is that kind of career I'm going to have? So yeah, I was at a loss, Alex, and I just had to, here's the thing. I said, I told the story I wanted to tell, but there's still other things in my life that I hadn't necessarily put in the memoir that I don't think necessarily deserve to be had enough weight or content to be a part of the memoir, to be its own personal essay. But there was like the germ of something there that I had experienced that I could now, I think this was the great joy for me, that I could actually make use of, and I would make use of it through fiction. And it was okay for me if the reader didn't know that this was actually true. I think with the memoir, what was so satisfying was like, this is a true story. Look what I experienced. Look what I lived through. And I think with fiction, I was like, okay, I'm okay if that's not necessarily clear. So I was able to still utilize certain aspects of myself and embellish, add to it, whatever, create a story out of it. If we talk about, there's specific things in this collection that, that like the germ of the thing that then I said, let me write this.
Yeah, I was going to ask you just to add to this, which is, having read your memoir and, also knowing you, and then reading this new collection of stories by you, because I knew some things about your family through your memoir, but I think it's true exactly what you were saying. This book feels like in these stories, something really truthful is being communicated to us, to me, when I'm reading them. There's something about them that it just feels like maybe there's more to say about, like in the story, A Beginner's Guide to Estrangement, which is about, a man who goes to visit his father, who he hasn't seen in 15 years in Iran. And then, knowing your father is Iranian, I feel like there's some truth to this. And I'm sure, I'm sure this would happen if you hadn't read your memoir, because you're writing and you all these stories are kind of in the first person. It just has this candidness to it that really connects, like you're being told secrets, or something. And that's the kind of fiction that I love. When that happens. And then, Last Meal at Whole Foods is another story. And I love that story. I love that title, but that's about, a guy and his mother who's suffering from an illness. She doesn't have much longer to go. And he's making arrangements, possibly having his, last couple moments with her. They just feel like they are from your life somehow. I don't know how true that is or not.
No, and that is true. Those, like, exactly, like, you've crystallized the thing, like with A Beginner's Guide to Estrangement, guy's going to Iran to see his dad, who he hasn't seen in 15 years. Well, yeah, my dad's Iranian. He lives in Brooklyn, but he has not spoken to me in 15 years. He hasn't spoken to me since my memoir came out. So that's all true. That's sort of like the heartbeat. That's the thing that makes me want to write the story. And then I surround it with a bunch of bullshit. By bullshit, I mean I make up a bunch of stuff. One thing about that, specifically about that story, that actually came out of Vanity Fair asked me to write something about Iran, which I don't know if folks here remember, January 2020, way back when, it was like, we're about to go to war with Iran. Remember that? Remember when that was like the big news item? And Vanity Fair.
I barely remember it because it feels like 10 years ago now.
Exactly. And they asked me to write something, which I did. And then the moment passed. And then something else big happened called COVID. So it was like, but so then I was like, oh my God, I wrote fucking 2,000 words. I got 2,000 words. I'm so bereft. It's like, I'm looking at it. What am I going to do with all this hard work? And then I say, I can't just, I gotta make something out of this. So it's not that those 2,000 words are all in that short story, but I was able to copy and paste some of it, but the idea of it is what I was able to sort of salvage.
Okay, Matt. Wow. Yeah, and I could, one of the stories that's really, really fabulous, and it's the story that opens up the book, and it's called Audition. And it is about a young actor, who's like, I think he's 19, dreaming about moving to LA, pursuing his craft. Was that, was that a story that sort of grew out of something super personal again?
Sure, same idea. That was me, Pittsburgh. I grew up in Pittsburgh, wanting to be an actor. In my case, it was moved to New York, not LA. And I don't know why I would have changed that for the story. So I don't know. For some reason, I decided to make it LA. Maybe because of Seinfeld. I can't remember. He talks about being on Seinfeld. But yeah. So again, that was like, for lack of a better phrase, the heartbeat, the thing that motivated me to write that. And then I surrounded it, as I just said, with a lot of made up stuff.
And there's just such a great scene in that story. It's a central scene where he goes on the audition for a play, and it's an integral role, but it doesn't have any lines. He's going to be on stage for the entire play, but there's no lines. And I think, well, I won't ruin it, but it's such a great scene. And and it's also a play that's happening, being put on in his mid-sized city, which he really wants to get out of also. Right. Yeah.
And we don't have to be afraid of spoiler alerts, I don't think.
Right. I just think, I didn't want you to, are you going to read from that story? No.
I could.
No.
Yeah.
You do what you were planning, but the thing I was going to bring up was he's in the audition. Can you explain what he's asked to do in the audition?
Yeah, he's asked to, I think it's to like be the color red. I can't quite remember something. And he's embodying basically a concept, and he has no fucking idea how to do that. And he does have a moment where he thinks if he was younger in his younger days, and the guy's only 19, but he's remembering when he was a child, that would have been something he could have done so effortlessly. He says his brain has become calcified and he can't think in those terms. And you know what's interesting, Alice? And listen, this is for all of the writers here today. The great thing about writing is all the things that we've experienced. Like, you never know, like, because I was once at an audition and the director asked me to be the color blue. And I was like, no way. And I was in college and I was like, what do I do? And I remember telling a friend of mine later, and he used the phrase, he was being mocking. He said, he asked you to embody a concept. And I just remember that whole thing, like, be a color, and that phrase, embody the concept. And listen, guys, that's 30 fucking years ago now for me, but it lodged in my brain, and now 2 years ago or whatever it was when I wrote this story, it's like, oh my God, I've got this data that I've saved for some reason that I can now use. And that is so, for me, that's really, really gratifying. It's really satisfying to be able to just I don't know, recycle what I've
And it-
experienced into
and it- yeah.
something.
And it becomes a great scene. I would even go as far as to say it makes that scene. Like
Oh, good.
it just makes that scene. This little thing that, not little at the time, but this thing that happened to you 30 years ago
Yeah.
suddenly makes it onto the page.
And by the way, there's another little moment in there. I mean, I don't need to go down the laundry list, but there's a moment when he's driving in a car with a guy he works with, and the guy talks about cleaning bricks and that he was paid a nickel a brick. And I remember being in high school once, and a buddy of mine skipped school because there was some building that got torn down. And he said, I skipped school to go clean bricks. Seemed like such a weird, absurd kind of thing. And again, it just lodged in my brain. There's a part of my brain, I guess all of our brains, we just held on to some stuff. Sometimes I have students, this is just, when I teach nonfiction, they'll write something. And sometimes they write something about trauma, some shitty thing that they've experienced. And it's always like, the good news and the bad news is like, the bad news is you experienced this, and now the good news is you're turning it into art.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's any sort of consolation, but it's not like we have a really great gift that we don't just have to like sit with this stuff and let it fester forever. We can actually put it to use.
Yeah, that's such a great phrase. I'm so happy you said that.
Do you, by the way, in your novels, do you find the same thing, that you're drawing from bits and pieces and moments? And
yeah, and those are the moments that I love to hit in writing fiction, where I can take some memory that I had, or something that happened to me that was really embarrassing, and it was a total fail or disaster and just awful, and give it to a character in a memory, or give it to a character in a piece of dialogue, like cleaning the bricks. And I do have I have so many examples of that, but in every good scene I feel that I have, there's something really, really personal that I did experience that I've put in that scene, and it's all over the place throughout my life.
And you just said something that was interesting. You said something embarrassing that happened to you. And, you're a funny writer, and you're not shy about having, I don't know, for lack of better, foolish characters, bumbling. I mean, I'm thinking about your novel, Eastman Was Here. Eastman's, he's bumbling. He's a bumbling guy.
Yeah.
I mean, you even said tonight, you said, you tried to write an op-ed piece, but you were trying to be too smart.
Yeah. It's,
honesty, able to laugh at oneself, not take oneself too seriously.
That's
all feels kind of important.
Yeah, you need it. And I think that's probably how I've gotten through everything. Every hard moment is that I, don't lose your sense of humor. I mean, I don't have a sense of humor about it when it's happening to me. It's actually feeling the real feelings, but then I've always been able to turn that, whatever that was, into a story, that I could tell. And before I was a writer, it was just to tell my friends or something, crappy that happened. Because I don't know if this is being a New Yorker thing or just being a person, but like, when I tell stories, or when my family tells stories, it's really just to complain. It's like complaining, like, you're not going to believe what crap happened to me today, and it's always about, I mean, certainly I'll tell specific stories that aren't that. When I'm asked, how did you meet your wife or something, I'm not going to be like, oh, you're not going to believe this crap. But normally when I'm going to see you and I'm going to talk to you, it's probably going to be about all the failures that happened over the last 2 years since I had coffee with you last, and all the ridiculous things that people say, just like, it's like Seinfeld. It's like Larry David's life, but you turn them into stories, and then suddenly you've beaten them, you've gotten past those really embarrassing moments,
That's a great way to put it. You've beaten it. Yeah.
And then if you could use it in your art, if you can use it in your fiction or in your writing, then that's really winning. You know, then that goes back to what you said. It sucks that you had to, what was the quote? It sucks that you had to live that, or
Yeah, yeah. The good news and the bad news. It's like the bad news is that you had to experience that, but now the good news is you're putting it to some sort of use in your art and writing.
yeah, that's great. Well, I have a couple more questions, but I'm going to leave that to the Q&A part, you know, to kick it off if people don't want to get started right away with their questions. But shall we kick it over to you for a little, for not it doesn't have to be little, for a reading?
Sure. Happy to do that. So the story I was going to read from is not, I think you alluded to it just briefly. And I mean, as you mentioned, there are a few stories in this collection that are dystopian, set in some odd form of America that's never fully explained. So I was going to read the beginning of one of them, which is called Fairground. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you'll get a sense of what is going on. So yeah, okay. So this is called Fairground. I've only been to one hanging in my life, and that was when I was 6 or 7 years old, or maybe I was 8. But who can really remember that far back with complete accuracy? This also happened to be during the period when the city was being rezoned. Sector A, now Sector G, Sector G, now Sectors Q and R, and so on, thanks to the mayor, who'd won by a landslide. It was going to take a while for everyone to get used to the changes, but everyone agreed that it would be worth it in the end. Sometimes when I was out walking with my mom, we would pass a row of school buses lined up like ducks at the crosswalk, waiting for the light to turn green. The faces of the secured populations looking through the windows with indifference and resignation, as if they'd been traveling for weeks across the country rather than hours across the city. They would be crammed into the buses, children too. Twice as many as the bus could comfortably hold, their belongings piled on their laps, often higher than their heads, suitcases, backpacks, lamps without lampshades. If you could carry it, you could bring it. That was the directive. That seemed fair. Don't stare, my mother would say. It's not polite. What I do remember for sure is that I've been taken to the hanging as something of an afternoon diversion by Mr. Montgomery, my stepfather, the first stepfather in a sequence of several, and with full consent of my mother, who considered the outing a good opportunity for me to bond with a man I'd just met a few weeks earlier. You'll learn to love him, she told me, an upbeat prediction that, as far as I could see, was based on little evidence. The day trip with Mr. Montgomery had also been a way for my mother to have some alone time, so she could study for her upcoming exam, because this also happened to be during that period when she'd gone back to school, mid-30s, trying to do something different with her life, something meaningful, and become a librarian. If all went well, she'd soon be able to get us out of our apartment above the nail salon, where we'd been living for a year and where the scent of nail polish would waft up through the vents between the hours of 10 and 6. I thought it smelled nice, and my mother thought it smelled annoying, and eventually we were so used to it that we no longer smelled it at all. She told me that she'd take me downstairs one of these days so that I could have my nails painted at half price being one of the perks of living above a nail salon. Think about what color you want, she'd said. What colors do they have, I asked. They have every color, she said. Seeing Mr. Montgomery and me off on that fall afternoon, she'd stood in the doorway of our apartment, Dewey Decimal Study Guide under her arm, telling us, "Have fun, boys." "Oh, we will," Mr. Montgomery had said. But the prospect of an outing with me had apparently made Mr. Montgomery contemplative, unexpectedly so, and he'd sat in the parked car for a while, saying nothing, hands on the wheel, key in the ignition, motor off, gazing through the windshield at I knew not what. I'd sat there too, wondering if we were having car trouble. Finally, he turned to me, eyes moist, saying how it had just occurred to him right then, how he was passing the tradition downward. "Do you know what I'm talking about, son?" he'd asked. No, I didn't. He seemed moved by this. He rubbed the back of my neck with something like fondness. The sensation was unfamiliar but pleasant. According to Mr. Montgomery, when he'd been a boy about my age, 6, 7, or 8, he'd been taken to his very first execution by his father, as had his father before him, and so on down the generational line. I was dubious that Mr. Montgomery had ever been a boy my age, let alone a boy at all, but he appeared to remember the past with emotion. Like yesterday, he told me. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The back of his hand looked old. This was what fathers did with sons, he said. This was what I would one day do with my son. He spoke with confidence and assertion. I understand, Mr. Montgomery, I said. Oh, you don't have to call me Mr. Montgomery, he said. I won't, I said. He wanted me to call him by his first name, William, or one of the variations thereof. You can call me Will or Willie, he said. You can call me Bill or Billy. It was an hour to the fairground, and the reminiscences were going to make us late. He leaned forward in his seat as if doing so made the car go faster. Through the windshield, the scenery of the city passed by at an alarming rate, occasionally broken by a flash of white space where trees and grass had been eliminated, and where we could briefly glimpse the towering snow-capped mountain beyond which lay the next city. Frankly, I didn't know what my mother saw in Mr. Montgomery. They seemed to have nothing in common, beginning with the fact that Mr. Montgomery's primary experience in a public library had been to use the public bathroom. I needed to pee bad, he'd said. I didn't find this funny, but he and my mother sure did, and they told the anecdote jointly and often, interpreting the distance that separated them on the compatibility index as something that strengthened their bond, rather than a troubling indicator that they were wrong for each other. Still, the first time I'd met Mr. Montgomery had been for dinner at Applebee's, which had been a promising start. I'd worn slacks and my mother had worn lipstick. They'd sat side by side in the big burgundy booth, and I'd sat across from them as if they were interviewing me for a job, everyone's hands folded politely on the table. Mr. Montgomery had told me I could order anything I wanted off the menu, and this added to the air of promise. Sky's the limit, he'd said. He was showing off for my mother. He's going to learn to love you, my mother had said to him. I knew he was trying to curry favor with me. I knew he knew I was the lone obstacle for him being able to sleep with my mother. So I ordered the most expensive thing off the menu. Why not? The double glazed baby back ribs, which I'd never heard of before. Apparently, this was the wrong choice. Don't be presumptuous, my mother said. How about the mac and cheese, Mr. Montgomery said. He was referring me to the children's menu. So I acquiesced and ordered the typical child's fare, chicken fingers and French fries. Why not get a milkshake to go with that, Mr. Montgomery said, trying to prove he was actually easygoing with money. Yummy, my mother said. No, I said. We arrived at the fairground with barely time to spare. The parking lot was filled to capacity and people were streaming through the big white gate above which read Sector N welcomes you to the city fairground. Soon this would have to be changed to Sector V. Mr. Montgomery drove around looking for an empty spot, cursing, going in circles, apologizing for cursing, talking philosophically about how this was everyone else's fault, that this was what happened when you stopped paying attention. Big crowds, little sensitivity, no parking. Everything is connected, son, he said. Yes, he was happy that the turnout was good because good turnout meant that was civic pride. But civic pride comes at a cost, he said. Back in my day, he said, he extemporized. How do you say that word? Extemporized? He extemporized. It's extemporized.
That's how I say it.
Okay. He extemporized about the past. I said nothing. Do you know what I'm talking about? He said. He didn't wait for an answer. Suddenly he turned to me. There's going to be blood today, son, he said, as if he were only realizing now what this excursion was all about. Are you okay with blood? He asked. He seemed concerned. He sounded as if he were prepared to turn the car around if I had answered no. I wanted to be okay with blood, but I wasn't so sure. I still had scabs on my knees from a few weeks earlier when my mother had tried to teach me how to ride a bicycle, and just when I was getting the hang of it, I'd crashed into the sidewalk. My mother had comforted me briefly, sweetly, cradling me in her lap. And two women from the nail salon had come over wearing aprons, smelling of polish. You have to get right back on, honey, they'd said. I like blood, sir, I told Mr. Montgomery. He liked that I liked blood. Good boy, he said. He said, you don't have to call me, sir. All right, that's where I'll leave. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Great reading. Great reading. Roaring applause.
I can hear the applause. I can hear the
right
applause.
now.
Even through
Yes,
the
yes.
baby bump. Yes. Take what you can get. Yes.
That's awesome. I mean, for me, that's such a crazy story. And just to get the ball rolling on the Q&A while everybody kind of figures out their questions. Also, you guys can put some questions in the chat, and I'll see them and call on you, or use the raise hand function, which I believe you can also do. Let's just talk about that story for a second, because I've noticed when you read this book and the way the stories are arranged, it's almost like you intersperse a realistic story with one that feels a little dystopian like that. And I'm interested in, and I remember the last collection was similar. It had a few stories that were a bit dystopian. Correct me if this is not the word you prefer to describe these stories, but yeah, where did these stories come from, and what I'm just interested in how you create these, as opposed to the other ones that are a little more realistic. I mean, and you've done a number of them now. Yeah.
Well, I think the dystopian stories are coming. I mean, the easy answer would probably be me looking at America and just like post-Trump election. No, I mean post when he was elected, going, let me imagine some worst case scenarios of what could happen, or worser case scenarios. There's that. I think a more complicated answer would be that growing up in the political household that I did, where, the thing about my childhood was I was actually taught that like America was already dystopian. It was really bad. It was going to get worse. And then the revolution was going to come. And then it was going to be great. And I'm not exaggerating. That was like that was the ethos of my home. And, and I don't know if I can articulate this so well, but there's also a part of it where like we were the problem. Like the revolution that we imagined, we wanted a communist revolution. We wanted the Russian Revolution in the United States. Lenin has a famous line where he says, like, what's a revolution without hangings? And so I'm speaking out loud now without having ever fully articulated, but in some ways these stories are both what is the situation of America, but in some ways like how me feeling like I'm the bad guy, but not being able to recognize it. I think that's one of the key, like this story, like the child, everybody's just taking this shit for granted. They're like, oh yeah, of course we go to hanging. That's our tradition.
Right.
Growing up, being taught to question everything. My mother was like, she could find the injustice in a haystack, but could not necessarily see injustices that were right in front of her face, like that were taking place within our household, or our own failings or her own failings. Or for instance, the fact that my dad left when I was a baby, never really heard from him. That all we just totally accepted that. We totally accepted that. That wasn't an injustice that was on our radar. So I think there's some of that psychology within these stories. Not that I need to express it. I'm not doing that in like literal terms, but I think some of that's like bubbling up.
Well, then it's so interesting that story, the protagonist of that story is a young boy. Just hearing from what you just shared about your life and what you were thinking. We have a question here from our writer student Chris Bogart, and then I'll get to the hand raised by Matthew Boyle.
Chris writes, in the reading you just did, I noticed two things. One, that you repeated the name Mr. Montgomery as if you, the narrator, was insistent that you were not liking him regardless of what he said or did. The other part of the question, are you aware of how your acting experience helped you tell stories?
That's Chris. Hi, Chris.
That's Chris, yeah.
Hey, oh, so great question. I'll start with the second part. So I don't know, I don't have access to Chris, but is the telling the story like the way I read aloud, or actually the crafting of a story on the page? Just for
Chris, you may speak, Chris.
Oh, hey, Chris, you are allowed to speak.
Thank you.
Okay.
Actually,
Hey, Chris.
Hi. It wasn't just the reading, although the reading had something to do with it. But the other thing is, I guess the question that I'm asking is a little more subtle, and that is not just, I gather you read well because you had acting experience, but what I'm asking is storytelling, the stuff coming out of your head. Is that coming also from your idea that you're thinking of dialogue as in plays?
Yeah. Hell of a question, Chris. First of all, thank you for the compliment about my reading just aloud. It's one of the things I have salvaged from my acting career, that whatever else, it's like, it's my moment to like, this is the one time I get to be an actor. So I'm gonna milk it. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That being in the theater, one of the things, and this is not like it's unique to a writer, but one of the things that I'm very aware of when I am writing a story really is like the audience, because there's not, like in theater, it's all about the audience. It's about, we're creating a production that an audience member, first of all, you have to be, on a very technical level, you've got to be like, are the sight lines going to be visible? Like, are they going to be able to see this actor's face from this angle? So I think it made me, being in the theater world, hyper conscious of the audience. So again, not necessarily just unique to me, that I think most writers are thinking of the audience, thinking of the reader. I'm thinking about, how do I engage the audience? I'll use the word audience/reader. How do I engage them? How do I keep them interested? If it was going to be a play, what would I use to create, when you're writing and you have a scene in it, let's just say in a, I'm just trying to think if I did anything here. Well, there's a scene in the car. I don't really describe the car. I say something about the windshield. I say something about the city passing by. In theater, especially when I did downtown theater with no budget, you could only pick a few things that could help show, here's the apartment, here's the nail salon, here's the fairground. What are those things I can use in order to make this sort of come alive for the reader so that they could picture it? One of the things, and this, I haven't thought about this before, one of the things I tell my students is that when the scene that they choose to actually get into in detail and do in slow way down, I say, imagine you have a really low budget. And so money, you have to pay for the props, you've got to pay for the lighting, you've got to pay for the costumes. What do you actually want to spend that capital on? What's important? Do we need to know what color socks they're wearing? I don't know, maybe we do, maybe that is important, but that's money you're going to spend on socks. And if we don't need to know, and what's more important is like, maybe you could have something about someone's hat. That's where you want to spend your money. So I think all of that gets mixed in. Again, I'm salvaging my failed acting career. The other question though was about Mr. Montgomery. Oh, the repetition of the name. Well, I think I'm doing that, Chris. I think I'm doing that because for me, he's never going to call the guy. Never, here, spoiler alert, he never calls him Mr. Montgomery. But there's something about the constant repetition of the name that I think was somehow humorous or absurd, or was pointing out that there's a major firewall between this man's name and he is going to call him Mr. What am I saying? He's never going to call the guy by his first name. So just repeating that over and over, I thought was somehow just entrenching in the reader's mind that there's this major, in a way, conflict between these two characters.
And that
Chris, you look
name,
like you're sitting in a really interesting place, by the way. I have no idea what's behind you. Those are like, it looks like those are, sorry to get in your business, but
it's fake. It's fake.
get
It's
the
fake.
fuck out. Okay, nice.
He's at a, yeah, he does that all. Sometimes he's sitting in like Harry Potter's
No, I'm
library or
actually,
something.
if you take a look at this, that's me back there.
What do you mean?
Oh, yeah, that is.
Oh,
That's your old
that's you.
office?
No, that's Oxford University.
Oh, wow.
Wow, you were the man back then.
So that's Oxford University? That's actually a photograph of you at Oxford University?
Yeah, that's a photograph
Wow.
of me in
I love it. I love it.
in Goodwin Library, which is a part of the Oxford Student Union. I
When
was
That's-
invited-
Zuckerberg
yeah.
finishes, Zuckerberg gets done with the metaverse, I bet you could actually like be sitting in that chair and the mouth could be moving and you could actually just be there.
A deep fake from the past. That was great. Thank you for those questions, Chris,
Yeah.
and thank you for your answer, Said. Let's go to Matthew Boyle, who's been very patient and has his
Hi,
hand up.
Matthew.
Hey, Matthew.
Hello. Hi. How's it going? First of all, I'd like to apologize for the awful angle. I'm currently sitting in my friend's house because all of my suite mates got the flu, and I found out this morning, so
Oh,
I
no.
ran. Yeah, so I'm currently sitting on the floor of his room. So that's the first thing. Second thing, as someone who is also very, very interested in theater, has done theater throughout middle school, throughout high school, and I'm currently in a production that I'm in this weekend.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And also someone who wants to be a writer, who I'm currently taking craft of writing with Professor Graydon, who is in this call. Hello. How do you get over the imposter syndrome? Because Alex, I know you mentioned that before, the imposter syndrome of, you know, my work is not worth, or it's not great. We had an assignment in Professor Graydon's class of a craft piece, and I must have wrote 4 or 5 different things that I kept scrapping because I was like, oh, this isn't good enough. I get like 6 or 7 pages and I'm like, this isn't good enough. This isn't good enough, until I finally went to my suite mates and I was like, hey, throw me ideas. And one of them was like, all right, how about you write about someone who works for death? And then I wrote that and I ran with that. But how do you get over that imposter syndrome when you're first starting out?
Another good question. And, you know, by the way, this is what's great about Zoom. I love seeing everybody's like inner life here, Matthew. That's awesome. And Alice, I would love to hear all advice. Welcome, Matthew. I got to be honest. Here's full disclosure.
Hit me.
I think I had the opposite problem. What's the opposite of imposter syndrome? It's inflated ego syndrome. It's I thought I was amazing syndrome, and I'm saying this before I had ever been published, and that was paralyzing for me, because if you think you're amazing, then the prospect of being rejected is so terrifying. I don't know, maybe it is a version of imposter. It's like,
Because I definitely have that too, like the fear
oh,
of
you do?
rejection.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right. Well,
no, and 100%.
congratulations. You suffer from both. So, but I think right now, I'd have to think about it. I think right now I'm keyed into my early days. This is, you know, we started off talking tonight about me submitting to that website, Mr. Beller's Neighborhood, which is not the most glamorous thing. For me, it felt like I was slumming. And I was like, okay, I will come down to your level, which is all bullshit, because it's a fantastic website and I should be so lucky to be in it. And as I've talked about, it actually was the thing that, you know, jump-started my career. But before that, I did have a feeling that I was an amazing writer, probably the greatest writer that ever lived, I think. Never mind that I'd never been published. So, and of course, the voice in my head must have known that was also bullshit. And it was very, very difficult for me to ever submit anything, which is to say I didn't really submit. I would write these pieces and I would feel like I needed to polish them. Hey, it's going back to Alex, when you said you wrote the op-ed piece for the Times,
Mhm.
where you said you felt like you needed to be smart in it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Everything I wrote had to be brilliant. It had to be the most brilliant. And at somehow, I don't know where this happened, something clicked in my brain, was just like, just write something that's good enough. Because trying to be brilliant, again, to use the word, it's just paralyzing and it's impossible. And brilliance is in the eye of the beholder. And you're never gonna get there, and it's a fool's errand. And just write something that's good enough. And by good enough, I mean, have I written something that holds together enough as a story? Holds enough as a story. You can always make it better, but is it like, is there a sort of satisfaction to this story? Have I said at least somewhere in the ballpark of something that I wanted to say? Is it clear? Will a reader be able to read this who does not know me and understand it? And by the way, all of that, what I just said, that's really hard to do. That's hard to do, man. It takes me a long time to get there now, still. So I'm not like dismissing it and going, oh, I'm just writing crap, but like this idea of needing to be genius was really, really debilitating. But Alex, do you want to say anything about? I'm happy if you have some thoughts.
Excuse me. Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think like, I think just, so for me, the imposter syndrome comes after I'm done creating whatever I'm creating, and having to talk about it. That's where, or do a reading like you're doing tonight. That's when I get the imposter syndrome, when I have to perform it in front of other people. But yeah, when I'm actually, I guess my answer to you, Matthew, is to really concentrate on whatever project you're doing and just sort of laser focus on that and just live in that world, whether you're preparing for a part or whether you're writing a new story, because that is where, that I have the same thing. That's where that's where my ego is. That's where my ego is huge. Well, not huge, but to the point where I feel like, okay, in this space, I can really play and let go and do anything and possibly do something great. I also had that same issue, Said, where I thought I'm the best I've ever seen. There's nobody, and you're humbled, right away as soon as the rejections start coming in. But yeah, I guess that would be my.
So Alex, are you saying when
answer
it's
to
time
that.
to talk about your work, there's an expectation that you're supposed to be an expert on your work? Yeah.
Yeah, I put that expectation on myself, like I should be that, and I should be. But really, it's like, you do a reading, nobody's even listening sometimes. That's the way I kind of got over it. I was like, they're still gonna clap. They're still gonna tell me it was awesome. It was great. I did a great job. So relax, have fun. And that, maybe that's what you should do in your show coming up, Matthew. And Matthew, what is the name of your show that you're performing in this weekend?
It's just like a cabaret musical as a welcome back to live theater. It's MTI put it together. It's called All Together Now.
Okay.
But
All right, put it in the chat if
Yeah.
you're looking for audience members.
Oh,
it's a
one
closed
last-
audience, sadly, because COVID. But yeah.
Okay.
Hey, one just coded to the. I think you're ahead of the game if you're aware of it, Matthew, and also know that it's something that we all suffer from, the imposter syndrome. Probably at every level you get to in your career. I don't know. Maybe there's a point where it stops, or at least lessens a bit.
All right, awesome. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Matthew. All right, let's go to John Voorow,
John.
who's one of our MFA writers. John.
Hi,
Hi, John.
I really like your work.
Thanks.
I was,
Is that a fake background, by the way, John, or is that for real?
no, this is real, but
Oh,
I'm in the English department because I have a class at 6, so I gotta.
okay.
But I know it looks like I'm in some kind of castle, but I was wondering if you talk a little about your drafting and rewriting process for stories, like how many drafts you do, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't. No, I mean, I revise as I go, man. I'm revising constantly. I'm not a writer, and I don't know, Alex, how you are, but I'm not a writer where I just say, let me just get junk down on the page, the whole first story down, and then I'll go back and clean it up. I don't work like that. I need to polish as I go. I need the sentence to be, this is embarrassing to admit, but it's like, I need the sentence to be perfect before I move on to the next one. I don't want to feel bad about that, because I feel like, for me, the kind of writer I am, or what works for me, is that, like, each sentence, and again, this is probably not revelatory, but it's like each sentence will inform the next one. And for me, I do work with a certain rhythm in my head about how just like I want it to flow. You know, do I want like short sentences, like 3 short sentences in a row, and then do a long sentence? Like, that's all really important to me. I guess it's a way to say it's not just what I'm saying, but it's how I'm saying it. So that's how I get through a first draft. I don't know if we could do some study on it. Maybe it's like I've rewritten every sentence on average 4 or 5 times. Now, when I get to the end, now I've got to go back and go, as I said earlier, is this holding together? Is this holding together as a story? Have I set up what happens at the end? Did I set that up in the beginning? For instance, is the character that comes in midway through fleshed out enough? Is the ending satisfying? What I just read today, I mean, it's like, it took me a while to figure out how I wanted to end it. No spoiler alert, there is a hanging. It took me a while to figure out how I wanted that hanging to go. Did I want it, how graphic did I want to be? Was there going to be any sort of comic absurdity in it? And then what I do, when I think I've got a story done, I give it to my wife. And what's great about that is she's not a writer. Alex, I'd love to hear what the situation is in your home, but like, my wife is not a writer, by which I mean, what's useful for me is that she doesn't come with her own agenda of, this is, as I would, oh, this is what literature should be doing. This is what I'm looking, you know, she's just looking for a fucking story that's going to keep her attention, that she's going to enjoy. And she will tell me straight. One of the very important things that she'll tell me is when she is bored. When she's bored. And that's never something I want to do to a reader, disinterest them. Boredom isn't the same thing as saying, oh, there's a soft moment or there's a long scene. That's not the same thing. But boredom is, I think, is when the reader actively is leaving the piece, is becoming antsy. So she'll give me very broad notes on that. And John, one thing that happens is, when I have written a story, in my mind, that's done. So when I get her notes, it's like, here, I'm going to use a football analogy. It's like it's like suddenly the QB's calling an audible, and I've got to go, what? I was thinking it was going to be this. Like, I've got to go, whatever I had in my head, I've got to somehow reimagine it. I've got to do it. I've got to fight it. Here's the calcification of the brain. You've got to be limber enough to say, whatever you're attached to, you got to be supple enough to say, I've got to change it or I've got to let it go. I mean, I'll give you one example, John, where I wrote a story, not in this collection, but where she read it, and she sat down in front of the laptop with me, and I remember her going through, she went through the first 9 pages. And I said, ooh, what's she going to say? She said, she's scrolling through, and then she said, see this, page 9? She said, this is where I became interested. What? The first 9 pages are fucking brilliant. What are you talking about? No, I got to figure out, they got to go. I couldn't do it right away. We also got to be easy on ourselves. Strong, you're not going to necessarily be able to rewrite just like that. You can't just go, oh, cut to the first 9 pages, fine, no problem. Yeah, I was bereft, but I gave it a couple of days, and then I got to it. I said, we got to make this work. What's important for me is get the story done, salvage all the work I put into it, cut those pages. Alex, what do you do?
That hurts.
It hurts. It's
cut
painful.
9 pages. Yeah.
But one good thing about writing is whatever you cut, maybe at some point, maybe you can salvage it. Maybe that'll become
Mhm.
something else.
Yeah.
We can recycle, not everything, but some stuff. Alex, what do you do? Do you write, like when you write your novel, you just say, I'm getting the whole thing done? First
No,
draft.
I'm similar, but this new novel that I've been working on, I have tried to get the whole first draft out first, just keep going, but that is not working because I'm halfway through, or I feel like I have half a novel, you know, page wise, but I've hit a wall. It's not working because I've neglected things that I should have figured out chapters ago. So I'm more of a writer like you. I tried to do this, you know, like Kazuo Ishiguro does this method because he knows he's really good in between drafts. You know, he knows he comes up with a lot of good ideas in between his rough draft and his next draft, and that's how he wrote The Remains of the Day. I tried to channel some of that magic this time around. It didn't really pan out for me, but you know, I haven't given up on it. But we'll see. I'm working a little differently this time. All right, we got time for one more question. We're gonna go to Corinne Cavallo, another MFA writer. But before she asks her question, I know people are going to leave for a 6:05 class. So I just want to say, copies of American Estrangement books are available in the Monmouth bookstore, and they are signed copies. We have book plates from Said that will be in the book. So you could drop by anytime this week if you want a signed copy. All right, let's go over to Corinne.
Oh, I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's the 605 class?
605 class is just the time period that people go to classes.
So it's
not,
very.
but there is a grad class. I'm not sure what it is. What's the grad class at 605, guys? It's poetry. Is it poetry? It's poetry or
It's,
nonfiction. No, it's
History of the novel.
history of the novel.
So it's a
Okay.
big class. Is it? Do
Yeah.
you guys cross genres? Like do creative nonfiction?
They do. Yeah,
poetry?
they do. They're allowed to do that here. And I encourage them to take like a poetry workshop or
Yeah.
you know, because like you do both. You do both. You've written, you write it. Yeah.
And I was going to say that I think that's a big part of writing is to be able to like learn from all the genres, learn from everything. I don't write poetry, but we read poetry sometimes in my creative nonfiction classes or my fiction classes, because I think it's like really good to just see how a writer, speaking of word choice and language and rhythm, and those are things we can draw from, even though we're not necessarily writing poetry ourselves.
Mm. All right,
Corinne.
let's go to Corinne. Corinne.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for doing this. I don't know if this is a strange question, but this is something I actually started talking about with Alex yesterday, because I'm right in the middle of writing a manuscript proposal for my book project. And I am finding it so incredibly difficult to approach writing about my writing, like more difficult than the actual writing itself. So how do you approach that? And how do you approach like even speaking about your writing? Do you have any tips? Does it get easier with time?
Yeah. So Corinne, you are putting together I'm sorry, say it one more time. A proposal? What do you
Yeah, it's a manuscript proposal for my my thesis manuscript that I'm working on.
And this, you're working on a novel?
Yes.
Okay. And this is going to be something that you want to send out to agents?
Yes.
Got it.
Hopefully.
Well, first it is something she's going to send to me before we work on her thesis. You know, she's proposing the manuscript to me. I'm going to read it, but hopefully it can be something that turns into that query letter, you know, down the road.
That's right. Yeah. Well, but correct. So the query letter, that's just going to be one page. Alex, unless you want to tell me otherwise, that's like one page where you would have like a paragraph.
That's it.
About your book. are you writing something that's longer than that? Specifically for Alex, or?
No,
No.
I think it's just about a page what I'm submitting to for the proposal.
Yeah.
But I think it's the most difficult page that I've ever written. So I don't know if you have any
No, I concur.
like
Concur. I found it very difficult to do that with fiction. I think for nonfiction, it came much easier because because the story is there, and maybe I had an extra hard time because it's short stories. So then it's like I need to talk about it thematically, I guess. So on one hand, Corinne, I commiserate. One thing that my agent, I remember saying to me was, I got a little too esoteric. And I don't know if this is helpful advice, but I think I was talking about because she has asked me before to write sort of an encapsulating page about my work. And I got very, I was talking ideas and themes. And she went talk about the stories specifically. I don't know if that's useful. I have no idea where you are in the process, but that did help me. Also, one thing, and I don't know again if this is useful, but to say sort of what was the impetus for writing this? Where is it coming from? What was the inspiration? Alex, do you have any?
That's a good lead in.
Yeah.
I think,
Okay.
just to think about why are you writing this? Where did it come from? And then just kind of going from there. And then, I hear the problem Corinne's having is that she's in the middle of a novel where she's composing the story. So she doesn't completely
So you
know
don't
what the
know
whole
even-
story is.
You don't even fully
Maybe
know it.
not.
Well, then how? So this is almost it's almost like a cruel mind game that's being played. Talk about the book that you have not written yet. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is. But I do tell them that it's important to just figure out, how to talk about your work up to now.
Good.
Just because you're going to have to talk about your work at some point, and you're probably going to blow it like I did the first couple times. And but I think it'll be something to just, what's the essence of the story? Give it to me in 2-3 sentences.
Well, that's a great. So this is something you ask all your students to do, because that feels like a really useful thing.
When they get to the thesis, they have to send in a project proposal before they register for a thesis, and I tell them that's the way I frame it.
And that project proposal is 1 page, or is it going to be more than that, or roughly?
It's 1 page. 1 page.
Oh yeah. That's I think that's useful. Corinne, I don't know if we have solved the problem, but probably good to be wrestling with it at least.
No, that was helpful. I think, part of my focus or part of my issue is, how do I tell this story in a paragraph?
Yes.
But I think that kind of helped remind me of things that I could incorporate, writing part of what inspired me to write it, because it's largely it's fiction, but it's based on my own life. So I do know how the story is going to end, fortunately. Wow.
Okay.
So it's just kind of trying to encapsulate that in, a paragraph.
Yeah.
But that
There you
was
go.
helpful.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Looks like our job is done here, Said.
Wow. All right.
We solved that one.
I
Listen.
know we're on Zoom, but I felt like I was feeding off the energy of the audience. So all the students here, thank you.
It's a really good crowd, and I want to thank everybody for coming.
Yeah.
I have so many more questions, so we're going to have you back in person.
I would love
because
that.
I wanted to talk more about I don't know, tons of things. The New Yorker, we didn't really we just touched that. I wanted to get into more of that. So we're going to have you back in person.
I would love that.
Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
Thank you to everyone who attended, and go out, get American Estrangement. It's at the Monmouth bookstore. Go to your local bookstore and pick up a copy. You're not going to be disappointed. It's an awesome, awesome book. Said, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, everyone. Have a great class. You're 6:05.